Hi, Steph.
Hi.
Welcome, everyone. We'll be commencing shortly.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being here today. My name is Trinity Ford. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the president of People with Disability Australia, or PWDA for short. A quick visual description of me. I'm a fair-skinned woman with copper red hair, wearing clear framed glasses and my little dainty gold fob necklace. If you spot me in public, you'll usually see me with a color-coordinated walking stick, walker, or motorized wheelchair, depending on the day. I'm coming to you today from Wongal land in Eora Nation. I acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout this land and across Australia, and I pay deep respect to elders past and present, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with disability, whose resistance and leadership are central to our collective fight for justice. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. People with Disability Australia is a national cross-disability rights and advocacy organisation. We are led by and for people with disability. We are a voice of our own for people with disability in all their diversity, and the national peak for LGBTQIA+ people with disability. When we advocate for our community, we speak from lived experience, from deep community connections, and from the front line of systems that too often exclude, exploit, or ignore us. And that's why we're here today. The federal election on Saturday, 3 May is just weeks away. People with disability make up a powerful voting bloc, some 5.5 million strong, and yet we're often remain sidelined in national policy debates. Too often decisions are made without us. Too often our rights are treated as optional extras, not non-negotiables. This election is a chance to change that. PWDA's election platform lays out what must come next. We're calling for what every Australian should be guaranteed: accessible housing, economic security, fair and fully funded support, a seat at the table where decisions are made, and for a government that acts on the recommendations of the Disability Royal Commission. This agenda was built by our community. Through national consultations and conversations with our members and the disability community, we've identified what matters most and what change is not only possible but overdue. If we want to make disability rights a defining issue of the election, we need all of you, our members and our allies and advocates, to act, to campaign, to vote. And that's why today's forum matters. It's a space for you to hear directly from political leaders about their positions on these issues and to ask the questions that matter to our community. We are very grateful to be joined today by the Honourable Amanda Rishworth MP, Minister for Social Services and the NDIS, as well as Senator the Honourable Jordan Steele-John from the Australian Greens. Invitations were also extended to coalition and independent MPs, and we are grateful that Minister Rishworth and Senator Steele-John were available to participate here today. To help facilitate today's forum, I'll be joined by PWDA leaders who carry forward this work every day. Steph Travers, our board secretary and member engagement advisory co-convener, Sebastian Zagarella, our CEO, and Megan Spindler-Smith, our deputy CEO. I would now like to introduce Sebastian Zagarella, who will take us through the agenda and the accessibility considerations for the event. While Seb is speaking, a poll will appear on your screen, which has one question on it. What would you like to get out of today's forum? You can answer that in the poll or in the chat box. You're on mute, Seb.
Sorry about that, everyone. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Seb Zagarella, and my pronouns are he, him. I'm speaking to you today from Gadigal land in the Eora Nation, and I pay my respect to elders past and present. As a visual descriptor, I'm a middle-aged man from a culturally and linguistically diverse background, Italian, with a pale complexion, salt and pepper beard, and a closely shaved balding head. I've proudly been PWDA's CEO since 2022, and I'm equally proud to be part of the LGBTQI community as a neurodivergent person living with HIV and psychosocial disability. Before we dive into the conversation, I'll take a moment to run through today's agenda and some important accessibility and tech tips so that you can get the most out of the event. Housekeeping and accessibility. Today's forum is being recorded and will be made public. If you don't wish to appear on screen, please turn off your camera using the stop video button in the Zoom toolbar. We have Auslan interpreters and live captioners available. The interpreters will appear on screen and rotate every 10 to 15 minutes. To view captions, press the CC icon in the Zoom toolbar. To minimize background noise, everyone's microphone will remain off unless invited to speak. How to ask questions. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions throughout the forum, particularly during the Q&A section. You can ask a question in the following ways. You can either raise your hand, click participants, reactions, or react to find the raise hand button. On a landline, press #9. Q&A function, click the Q&A button in the Zoom toolbar, type your question and press send. You can choose to be identified or remain anonymous. Chat box. While we won't be taking questions through the main chat box, if you're having trouble accessing other functions, send your questions directly to the user titled Event Questions. It is important to note we may not be able to give everyone who wishes the opportunity to speak or answer all questions received. We do, however, encourage everyone to use the chat box to share comments and connect. This is a space for interaction and the community and will be monitored by our team to ensure this remains a safe space for everyone. Some notes on technical support. If you do need help during the session, message technical support in the chat box. You can also contact us via email at comms, that's COMMS, @pwd.org.au, or you can phone or text us on 0490 839 986 or 0492 847 551. These contacts are also in the chat box now. Throughout the event, you may hear from my colleague Anastasia, who's keeping us on time. And Anastasia, can you please say hi to everyone so they know your voice?
Hi, everyone. I'm Anastasia. This is my voice.
Thanks, Anna. We'll take a 5-minute break halfway through, but please step away whenever you need to throughout the agenda today. Please feel free to take time away at any point if you need it. The poll is just about to close. Please finish up your responses. Today's agenda includes remarks from the Honourable Amanda Rishworth MP, Minister for Social Services and the NDIS. An overview of PWDA's election platform with Trinity Ford, our President, and Megan Spindler-Smith, our Deputy CEO. Insights on how members get involved, including our community activation kit. Then we'll have a break. We'll return from the break with a Q&A session led by Board Director Steph Travers, remarks from Senator Jordan Steele, and Trin, our President, will be doing closing remarks. Thank you everyone who has completed the poll. Many of you would like to, have we got the results there? Finally, if you're a person with a disability and not yet a PWDA member, now's the time to join. It's free and it's one of the best ways to shape our work and stay connected. The team is dropping the membership link into the chat now. Thanks again for today's forum. I'll now hand over to our Deputy, Megan Spindler-Smith.
Thank you, Seb. Well, hello everyone. I'm Megan Spindler-Smith. My pronouns are they, them. I'm the Deputy CEO of People with Disability Australia, and I'm joining you from New South Wales on Darug country in the Hawkesbury. And I want to pay my respects to elders both past and present. By way of visual description, I am a femme presenting person with long hair that's worn up. I'm wearing dark framed glasses, red lipstick, emu rainbow feather earrings, and a black top. This forum is an important forum opportunity for us as people with disability to hear directly from those who are seeking to represent us in the coming federal election. Today isn't just about speeches, it's about understanding where candidates and parties stand on the issues that shape our daily lives. And with that, I am very pleased to introduce our first guest speaker, the Honourable Amanda Rishworth MP, Minister for Social Services and the National Disability Insurance Scheme. She has been the member for Kingston since 2007 and brings a background in psychology and community mental health to her work in government. We're really grateful to have Minister Rishworth here with us today to share the Australian Labor Party's commitments to the Australians with disability and to outline how the ALP government will respond to the priorities of our community. So please welcome me please join me in welcoming Minister Amanda Rishworth.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for having me here today. And I will start by acknowledging that I'm coming to you from Ghana land and pay my respect to elders past and present. And also a visual description of me. My pronouns are she, her, and I have dark curly hair, glasses. I'm wearing a black and white dress today. And a pinkish reddish lipstick. I'm not sure the colour, but it is really great to be with you today. And I would like to start by thanking PWDA for hosting this forum and for the advocacy that you do. As one of our DROs, your input is really important, and so I did want to acknowledge that. Look, for me, it's been a really busy time in the last 3 years as the minister that's been focused on particularly the disability ecosystem outside the NDIS, but now, of course, with the more recent responsibilities within the NDIS. There is a lot of work being underway that will continue to occur into the next term if we are elected. Firstly, there has been a lot of work in implementing the recommendations of the Disability Royal Commission. There is enormous work still to do there. But there's also been a huge amount of work in reforming the disability employment services. They have not been working and they have not been fit for purpose. And so that work is certainly underway. And I've been really working, and this will need to continue to be worked, to making sure we're bringing the words off the paper of Australia's disability strategy into life, into reality. And of course, working with the states and territories on both reform of the NDIS, but also the design of foundational supports are really important. But look, I'll go through some of the areas that PWDA have asked me to talk about. Firstly, I was asked to talk a bit about social security. And of course, our focus early in our term was our priority was about lifting income support across the board for those on job seeker and student payments. That was a real focus, as well as in our budgets lifting rent assistance. And as a result, we've lifted rent assistance, the maximum rates, by 45%. Because we knew that rental stress was significant. We also had made some reforms in the social security safety net where there is a higher rate of job seeker. We actually extended who could access that to those with a partial capacity to work of 14 hours or less, and also those aged 55 and over, increasing their job seeker by about 30%. And we also did some reform on the disability support pension impairment tables. That was very much from feedback around a stronger guidance around episodic and fluctuating conditions, and allowing all registered psychologists, not just clinical psychologists and psychiatrists, to provide that. Also, more recognition around the impacts of side effects of treatment, such as chemotherapy and dialysis. The impact that this, along with our redesigning of the tax cuts, has just been demonstrated by ANU, is to show that the poorest 20% have had the biggest benefit as a result of our changes, both in terms of our income support changes and our tax changes. Of course, we keep working with our Economic Inclusion Advisory Committee to be guided by the work that they do, and we'll continue to work with them as we look at strengthening our social services safety net. Now, I've also been asked to talk a bit about disability inclusion, and this has been a really big area of passion of mine in the last 3 years, recognising that the NDIS plays such an important role in the supports, but we're not really going to get the value of the NDIS if we don't have more inclusive service systems, mainstream service systems, but more inclusive communities and societies. And so I'd like to particularly acknowledge all of those who have worked on the new refreshed strategy that now includes a policy priority on homelessness, as well as the 3 new targeted action plans on community attitudes, inclusive homes and communities, and upholding safety, rights and justice for people with disability. There's also been a lot of work across the Commonwealth, other agencies in embedding disability. I see myself, and I've said this a few times, within the broader government, and I'm a Labor Party representative, so I'll use this term, as a union delegate. But we've had some real achievements in other portfolios to drive this. And I'd make reference to the new aviation specific disability standards and the new aviation industry ombuds scheme, which is going to provide and work through, and we're developing at the moment, and if we get elected, finalise this, to actually have a new aviation specific disability standard, which is so important for so many people where air travel has been incredibly difficult. There's the creation of the new Centre for Excellence in Intellectual Disability Health, and the release of the Arts and Disability Associated Plan as within the arts portfolio. Greater equity for arts workers and audiences with disability. And we've really tried to work, and this work will continue, to putting disability inclusion at the forefront of emergency management. And I think that was really clear. So this has been really important. We've also been reforming, Inclusive Employment Australia, which we launched later this year, really redesigning, reforming disability employment services, opening it up to anyone whose primary barrier is disability to work. So making it not about tick and flick and administration, but mutual respect and individual goal settings for helping people into jobs and careers. So I'm really excited about the launch of the new Inclusion Employment Australia, and of course the National Centre for Excellence that will drive. I couldn't believe that quality was not measured in the old DES program. Quality will be key. How is the experience of people with disability will be key. And if we're elected, it will be measured and it will be published so that we can have continuous improvement, not set and forget. I think the other area I did want to talk about is obviously the foundation supports, and we can get into those questions a little bit more, but we do want to reform the information linkages capacity building program. This is really important that we get national coverage. This program has been one-off project based, and some of the projects have been excellent, but then the funding falls away. And so what we want to see in this program is really the building blocks of what will be foundational supports to start that. And it will be about longer term programs and longer term capacity building projects that give certainty And how do we get some of the access to this much wider for people with disability? So, of course, we will continue to work with the states and territories around foundational supports and building those up. And finally, I will touch on the NDIS because I'm very keen to leave as much time as possible for question and answers. But the NDIS is such an important piece of social infrastructure. I worked closely with Minister Shorten in this, and we need to make sure that it is sustainable for future generations to come. But that shouldn't be at the expense of making sure that people have access to the scheme, that it's equal access, that it's fair access, and that it's transparent. And they are key things that I think drive me in how we make sure that the NDIS is really the best it can be. But importantly, I think over the 10 years of the previous government, it really, I mean, we saw, quite frankly, a number of people with disability be taken advantage of. That really the policy didn't have people with disability at the centre. So I am very keen to do that and make sure that that happens. Because we do need to get this right. We do need to make it sustainable. This isn't about cutting indiscriminately. We can't do that. The NDIS is too important, and I'm really committed to working. If I am lucky enough to be the NDIS Minister, along with the Social Services Minister, to working in partnership to get it very much centred on how we can make this the best possible it can be, but integrate it and leverage the benefit by working on an inclusive society outside of the NDIS. So I might leave it there, Megan, because I do want to get to questions, but thank you very much for your indulgence there.
Thank you so much, Minister, for those very important and clear messages and opening remarks. Well, what we're going to do now is actually move on to a very short Q&A segment where I'll be asking a series of questions on behalf of People with Disability Australia and our wider community. To be clear, this is not an open Q&A session, so we won't be taking any live questions from the audience. However, the questions you're about to hear reflect some of the most pressing concerns that have been raised by our members and the broader disability community in the lead up to this forum. So we're going to kick off. So my first question is around the important commitment to genuine co-design. We know the ALP and the disability community have committed to genuine ongoing co-design of all policies and reforms that affect people with disability. The recent NDIS co-design reset was an absolutely welcome response to the concerns that many of us, including PWDA, raised about accessibility in those processes. If returned to office, how will you ensure that all co-design processes are inclusive, accessible, and ensure that they actually reflect the very diverse, full diversity of our community?
Yeah, look, thank you very, very much for that question. And I can say that I am absolutely committed to co-design. I'd also make the point and that I'm absolutely committed to co-governance as well. And I have to say, with the disability data asset and the work that I did along there to actually have co-governance there. So not just in the design of it, about how we protect and safeguard people with disabilities information, but as this asset that will not only support the improvement of policy, but importantly also very, very much help with the governance ongoing. And I think you've seen my commitment through the disability research partnership as well, where we funded it but handed that governance over, the direction over to people with disabilities. So I can honestly say that we are very committed, not just in the initial phases, but in long term. In terms of how we work in an inclusive way, it is really important that we keep doing that. And I've been really clear, if I'm Minister, I expect my department and the NDIA to do that. For me, there was a very good experience with the National Autism Strategy. We had co-governance there, and I have to say it is really important to have government in those rooms, because ultimately they have to take it forward. But through our consultations there, we partnered with disability organisation consultative organisations to actually run the consultation. So sometimes it is organisations of people with disability that can really consult well. We looked at a variety of forms of ensuring that different methods and ways of contributing. You know, while DROs are really important to provide long submissions, some people with disability just want to make a comment, or would just like to get on a comment page online or be there in person. So look, I'm very committed around the consultation, but through co-design, we are committed to having people work with us from the beginning. It's not just consultation. I absolutely accept that. And I think, you know, there are a number of co-design groups within the NDIA. Of course, we need to work with states and territories as well. And one of the challenges is also not just working at the national level, but working with the states and territories with their co-design work as well. So I think there is a lot of opportunity, and I am absolutely committed, whether it was through the NDIA, through our different strategies, to make sure it is inclusive, and we're looking, engaging with our DROs, but also looking at how we can broaden that co-design across the board.
Thank you. I think the call out around co-governance is really important, because it is a place where we do need to make sure that people with disability are not just designing, but actually being key to the decision-making process. So I think this is it's a good call out, and it's something that we know is really important to continue. And thinking about that, when we're talking about the Disability Royal Commission, as part of it, it has set out a really strong framework for change. If re-elected, what concrete progress can people with disability expect to see in those first 12 months, particularly around recommendations that require the really important legislative or systemic reform that we need?
Look, thank you for that question. The Disability Royal Commission was a huge body of work, and I really wanted to thank every single person that provided, you know, this sort of a voice, I think, in that Disability Royal Commission, and appreciate the huge contributions. I have to say, we didn't wait until the Disability Royal Commission. The Disability Inclusion Services and Inclusion Act was introduced, which is critical for putting a human rights framework into supports and services outside the NDIS. The legislative reform had not kept up with some of the human rights perspectives that had been embedded in the legislation of the NDIS. So we legislated that, which was incredibly important. But as we worked through, we continue to, for every recommendation that we accepted or accepted in principle, we have started or will start processes in place to progress it. And, you know, for example, we have already amended the NDIS Insurance Scheme Act to ensure that there is at least one First Nations person there at all time. We have obviously changed the new Inclusion Employment Australia that had excluded people with less than 8 hours of work capacity. We've opened that up to everyone. So there's a number of policy and legislative changes that we will begin. Obviously, one of the key recommendations in terms of legislation was looking at the Disability Discrimination Act, and that is work where consultation is beginning or is about to begin. And obviously that is work that we are committed to if we are re-elected into this process. So look, we will, the design of what the First Nations Disability Forum looks like, we've begun consultation on that. So in terms of progress, we will continue to be committed to concrete progress. We committed, of course, to publicising our progress each year, and the first progress update will be published in July this year. So we're not scared of the scrutiny as well. So we are very much committed to that. Some of the challenges are, of course, some of the joint recommendations that exist with states and territories, because there are many joint recommendations that exist, but all states and territories have committed to a coordinated progress on that, and all have committed to working together to do that. So look, we are absolutely committed to progressing that work. Look, sometimes it's not as fast as everyone would like, but there is certainly a commitment from me as the person responsible to coordinate that across government as well. I think there's 16 Commonwealth ministers involved in the response as well. So, but the commitment from all of my Commonwealth ministers would be to progress that work. And you can see that, as I mentioned, with the aviation disability specific schedule for aviation. That's an example of where it was taken up in what it was a broad aviation white paper about slots and how many aircraft can go into an aeroplane at one time. I was very, very pleased that we were able to elevate particularly consumers with a disability in that white paper.
Great, thank you. I know that this is a big question for a lot of people with disability, because the NDIS is a really important part of many of our lives. The NDIS participant service guarantee is not currently being met. People are experiencing distress due to the delays in access, planning and reviews, yet the budget projects a reduction in administrative spending for the NDIA. So how will a re-elected Labor government ensure that the service guarantee is still able to be fully delivered so that participants' experiences improve and don't keep getting worse?
Yeah. Look, thank you for that question. And coming into the role as the NDIS Minister, speaking with people, I know that these are life-changing supports, but I do also understand there is sometimes frustration with the administration of the program. In terms of putting funding into the roles, we have increased the ASL in the agency significantly. Some of those have been new positions, some of those have been turning contractors into public servants. Now, I have to say we've received criticism of that from particularly the LNP, who have criticised having these ASL. These have been frontline ASL people that are delivering. Now, I think empowering the ASL, or the Australian Public Service, is really important. You contractors, you don't keep corporate knowledge, and you can't have a consistent experience. So in my info, there was an around supporting assessments, supporting planning and a range of things. And so we will continue to work. But that is where I think there is huge opportunity for the new planning framework to work on how we make sure things are really fair and equitable and transparent for participants. I think a lot of frustration comes from sometimes a lack of, why was I funded? and feeling you have to continually go through, get to work on how we get this right the first time. And so looking not just at the numbers, but the training, the experience, and how we are able to deliver a more equitable and fair planning framework for people is really important as well.
Thank you, Minister. I think linking in with that is really the importance of foundational supports. We really did, when we saw the budget recently, welcome a commitment to foundational supports. These supports need to be nationally consistent and accessible to all people with disability, especially those who do not have access to the NDIS, so those outside of the NDIS. Their success hinges on strong agreement between the Commonwealth and the states and territories. And I know you've recognised that this is not a simple process, but what levers would you use if re-elected to ensure such an agreement is reached?
Yeah, look, thank you for that question. And you're absolutely right. Foundational supports, which, you know, the review identified as so important. A lot of the focus in the broader discussion has been on sort of foundational supports for children at an early age, but we're also talking about general supports for people with disability right across the country. And so it is really important we work with states and territories. Some of the things that I've been really clear about is that foundational supports are not a replacement for states and territories to be investing and making their mainstream systems more inclusive. That work should be going on anyway, and whether that's education systems or health systems, that work needs to occur. So we have had many planning, but sorry, in saying that, there are many state systems where the delivery or the opportunity to deliver these foundational supports could be critical. And so it is about working with these states and territories very closely. We've had over 60 meetings, and there is a real appetite to engage from the states and territories. I think where the rubber hits the road is always funding and how we organise. Some of the principles that underpin foundational supports are that they are accessible around the country, that it shouldn't matter which state you're in and what you can access. And I do think the beginning of how we redesign the ILC program presents us a real opportunity about how, rather than just project-based, we can have ongoing foundational supports that are available to people. I think very much we will need partnership in this. You know, I can't see, you know, a situation. Obviously, we have to co-design, and we've been having some great meetings around that. Particularly interestingly, for families. For families of, you know, are getting supports as well have been really critical. But as we work through this, making sure that these are available. So in terms of levers, we'll keep working with the states and
Megan speaking. Minister Rishworth, I just to let you know,
there has been really good engagement, but my intention.
I just wanted to let you know your sound did cut out for a moment. Apologies, and we did just miss the end of what you were saying.
Oh, sorry about that. As I was saying that I do think as we move forward, if we're re-elected, this is something I would very much going to prioritise with states and territories, and I know the government feels the same.
Thank you. Now, just acknowledging the time, and I'm really appreciative that you have time for one more question. So our last question is around the Disability Royal Commission, because as part of that, it really made clear that real change must extend beyond the NDIS to housing, employment and education. So how would a re-elected Labor government ensure that people with disability are prioritise across all of these portfolios with clear accountability and outcomes?
Look, thank you very much for that question. You're absolutely right. I mean, the key message of the Disability Royal Commission is that inclusion keeps people safe. And that is a critical message that I have heard. Of course, I think in terms of disability employment, for example, as I said, we've been reforming the Disability Employment Service to create a new service that will not be, it'll be not just people having to acquit their mutual obligations, which often it was seen previously. It's about opening the doors for open employment for anyone that wants to use it, with disability being their primary barrier to work. But also with the new agreements we've struck with states and territories around the fully funding our public schools, particularly what was known as the Gonski funding, there has been clearly a disability loading in that funding that states and territories, of course, will need to ensure and drive better inclusion in schools. And housing is really critical as well, about how we drive more opportunity for this. But just in our Safe Places inclusion round, which was about crisis accommodation for women and children escaping domestic violence, we made sure that the inclusion round did, for example, provide spaces that were fit for purpose for people with disability, that was inclusive and could meet their needs. That was one of the determining factors of whether these organisations got funded. So there are, of course, definitely cross portfolio issues, and with the new targeted action plan around, well, in terms of elevating homelessness, but also community and housing, all states and territories and the Commonwealth have signed up to that. That was informed by people with disability, and if re-elected, I look forward to continuing to work across the board to drive that work.
Thank you so much, Minister Rishworth. And look, thank you so much for joining us today and outlining the Australian Labor Party's commitments to our members and people with disability. We really do appreciate the time, and we appreciate that you came here and to engage with our community and share responses to the priorities that have been raised by us and our members. So look, thank you so much. We appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we're going to move on and have a little bit of a chat around PWDA's election platform. So I'm really excited to be here alongside our President, Trinity Ford, to introduce PWDA's federal election platform, which has been built by and for people with disability. It's really important to note that this platform isn't just a policy checklist. It's a vision for our full social and economic inclusion. It was built in consultation with our members and the disability community across the country. Trinity and I are going to take you through each of our 7 key priorities. But first, what we want to do is hear from you. We're launching a quick poll right now, which should pop up on your screen in a minute. Please take a moment to select the top 3 issues that matter most to you and that will actually influence your vote in this federal election. The poll will stay open throughout this segment, so please do not feel you have to rush to answer this immediately. So to take us through our first priority while you're having a go at answering the poll, I'm going to hand over to our wonderful President, Trinity Ford.
Thank you, Megan. Yes, as just said, for those who might be joining us, welcome. My name is Trinity Ford and I'm the President of PWDA. The first priority for our election platform is to invest in the NDIS, guarantee long-term sustainable funding, ensure participant control over supports, and prevent cost cutting that restricts access to essential supports. The NDIS is essential. It enables people with disability to live independently, participate in work, and engage in community life. But right now, we're seeing funding pressures and reforms that risk dismantling its foundations. The numbers tell the story. Every dollar invested in the NDIS returns $2.25 in value. Undermining funding could cost over 10,000 jobs across Australia for every $1 billion cut to the scheme. The economic impact of cost cutting is real, and so is the human cost. So that's why we're calling on the next federal government to, one, guarantee long-term sustainable funding to maintain the integrity of the NDIS. Two, protect participant choice and control, ensuring that the scheme continues to support the actual needs of people with disability. And thirdly, prevent or reverse cost-cutting measures and reforms that reduce access to essential supports for people with disability, which ultimately increases costs in other government services. A fully funded, participant-led NDIS isn't just good policy, it's good economics, and it's essential to our rights. Back over to you, Megan.
Megan speaking. Thank you, Trinity. Now, as we know, NDIS is not the only important thing to people with disability. So our second priority is to fund that nationally consistent foundational supports. We need to ensure that disability supports are outside the NDIS are consistent, available, and delivered. So let's be clear, foundational supports are new disability-specific supports that sit outside of the NDIS. These are essential, they're not optional. They are vital for the nearly 5 million Australians with disability who are not eligible for the NDIS, and also really critical for many transitioning out of the scheme. These supports should include community-based services, early intervention, home and psychosocial support, peer networks, and essential aids and equipment. If it's done right, they can be the backbone of inclusion by helping people with disability participate in everyday life, help us stay connected to community, and help us avoid that crisis intervention. But right now, we have a serious problem. There's no long-term national agreement for how these supports should be funded, delivered, or overseen, and we know the likely impact. We recently did a survey and we found that more than 92% of our respondents are deeply concerned about that postcode lottery when it comes to accessing these supports. We need foundational supports framework that ensures where you live and who you are doesn't determine whether or not you get the support that you need. The next federal government must implement a nationally consistent foundational supports framework with that strong oversight and ensure that equity is actually at its core. We need to make sure we're expanding services to reach regional, remote, and marginalised communities, including the LGBTQIA, SB+ people with disability. Protect against service gaps that have been created by shifting or narrowing the NDIS eligibility criteria, and most importantly, a guarantee of genuine co-design. And so that leadership by people with disability and our representative organisations are not just during the development, but throughout the whole implementation and governance. A system that works for us must be built by us. It's pretty simple, because to be properly funded and co-designed for foundational supports, they will keep people out of hospital, they will reduce the reliance on crisis services, they will help to promote early intervention and long-term well-being, and they'll strengthen the rights, autonomy, and dignity of all of us as people with disability. Back to you, Trinity.
Thanks, Megan. Our third priority is to raise the rate. increase income support payments, including the disability support pension and job seeker, to above the poverty line, so people with disability can afford the cost of living and achieve financial security. Increase Commonwealth rent assistance to cover the real cost of accessible housing. So right now, thousands of people with disability in Australia are being forced to live in poverty. That's not an exaggeration, it's a fact, and I'm one of them. It's a direct result of government policy. No one should have to choose between paying rent, buying food, or filling a prescription. But for many in our community, that's the daily reality. So in 2018, 38% of people living in poverty had disability. Today, income support payments, like the disability support pension and job seeker, remain well below the poverty line. So let's have a look at the numbers. A single person on the DSP receives just $74.79 per day. The Henderson poverty line sits just above $90 a day as of September 2024. For job seeker recipients, the situation is even more dire, just $55.57 a day, despite nearly half of recipients having a disability. And these payments don't even account for the additional costs of living with disability, like that we need accessible housing and assistive technology, medical aids, specialist care, transport, and home modifications. These supports are meant to be a safety net right now, but they're actually trapping people in poverty. So that's why PWDA is calling on the next federal government to take real action to raise the job seeker and income support payments by at least $82 a day to lift them above the poverty line. Ensure people with disability can qualify for DSP across multiple impairment tables. Implement Recommendation 9 from the 2024 Economic Inclusion Advisory Committee. Remove the 30-hour work limit on that DSP so that people can engage in more flexible work without losing their essential income. And lastly, to increase Commonwealth rent assistance by 60% to reflect the real cost of accessible housing close to services and support, and how much housing has gone up over the last few decades. Poverty is a political choice, and we need our next federal government to make a different choice.
Megan speaking. Our fourth priority is making housing accessible. We need to mandate livable housing design silver standard as part of the National Construction Code across all states and territories. It is part of the code, but not every state and territory has signed up. And we need to commit to a national housing plan that meets the needs of people with disability. Housing is a basic human right. Right now, the right is being denied too far to too many people with disability in Australia. Accessible housing is not a luxury. It's not even a nice to have. It's essential for our safety, our health, our independence, and our ability to engage in life. And yet across the country, people with disability are facing a housing system that consistently fails us. We are more likely to experience housing insecurity. We are more likely to be living in unsafe conditions, and we are more likely to be excluded from housing policies that don't consider accessibility from the start. Currently, only about 5% of new homes even meet the basic livable housing guidelines, which themselves were developed over a decade ago. Most homes simply don't accommodate our mobility or support needs or even our independence. But the demand is only rising, and the number of Australians with a mobility disability is projected to grow from 3 million to 5.75 million over the next 40 years. And over 80% of older Australians aged over 55 want to age in place in our homes. If we don't act now, the crisis is only going to deepen. So PWDA is calling on the next federal government to take real action. Mandate accessibility in all new housing using the National Construction Code's Livable Housing Design Silver Standard across every single state and territory. Ensure people with disability are prioritised in national housing and policy, homelessness policy. Make sure we develop an action plan for people with disability under the National Housing and Homelessness Plan and increase investment in accessible, independent social housing for people with disability with high support needs. This isn't about buildings, it's about inclusion, it's about life. Accessible housing enables people with disability to live where and how we choose, access our work, our education, our healthcare, and avoid institutionalisation or homelessness, and participate fully in our communities. And let's be clear, when you build for people with disability, you build for everyone. It's the curb cut effect.
Exactly. Trinity speaking. Our fifth priority is ensure disability representation in government, create a Minister for Disability Inclusion in Federal Cabinet, and establish a dedicated Department of Disability, Equality and Inclusion. Right now, more than 55 million Australians live with disability, but we're not properly represented at the highest levels of government. There is no Federal Minister for Disability Inclusion, no dedicated department to oversee disability policy, and no coordinated approach to ensure that our rights and needs are prioritised across government, and that must change. Disability intersects with every portfolio: health, education, housing, employment, plenty more. But when no one is responsible for connecting those dots, the outcomes fall short. We end up with fragmented policies and missed opportunities like we saw with the recent federal budget. PWDA is calling for a Federal Minister for Disability Inclusion in Cabinet, backed by a Department of Disability, Equality and Inclusion. This structure would ensure real accountability, stronger coordination, and policy development that actually reflects the lives of people with disability. It would also provide leadership in implementing the Disability Royal Commission's recommendations, specifically on that minister as well as more broadly, and making sure that we get NDIS reforms right.
Megan speaking. Our sixth priority is to ensure that we protect our human rights. We need to strengthen disability rights through a Human Rights Act and improvements to the Disability Discrimination Act. We need to fully fund individual and systemic advocacy services across Australia so people with disability can protect and enforce their rights. People with disability in Australia continually face discrimination, abuse, exclusion, often with no meaningful avenue for justice. Australia signed the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disability, but those rights aren't fully reflected in our laws. The Disability Royal Commission made that clear. We need stronger protections and we need them now. PWDA is calling for a National Human Rights Act, supported by reforms to the Disability Discrimination Act and the introduction of a Disability Rights Act as recommended by the Disability Royal Commission. We also need fully funded systemic and individual advocacy services so people with disability can understand and actually enforce our rights. In our most recent member survey, 72% of people said we need stronger legal protections, especially for those who are multiply marginalised, including LGBTQIA+ people with disability. We must embed our rights in law, not just to prevent abuse, but to actually ensure safety and equal access to justice.
Trinity speaking. Our seventh priority is support diversity in the public sector. Increase employment of people with disability and safeguard diversity, equity and inclusion programs in federal public sector workplaces. Our final priority is about employment and the critical role that the federal public sector must play in leading by example.
thing online.
Sorry, we've got a microphone unmuted.
So it doesn't work out with them. There's 5 people in this.
I'll just get my
There's only
team
like
to
5 of
action
them.
that.
Yeah. And they can put out a list of, and it's like
And then
mental
employment
health.
rates for people with disability have stagnated for decades. Just 60.5% are participating in the workforce, compared to nearly 85% of people without disability. And in the federal public service, only 8.5% of employees identify as having disability, far below our representation in the broader population. This matters. The public sector is Australia's largest employer. It should reflect the diversity of the community it serves, and that includes people with disability. We need to be represented in every level from entry to leadership. So we're calling on the federal government to set a disability employment target above 7% across the Australian public service, and to protect diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI programs that support our recruitment, retention, and career advancement. When we are included, we shape better policies, we improve service delivery, and we build public trust. Improving our representation in the public service will lead to more effective government and open doors for future disabled leaders, and have various trickle-down effects back into the private sector, which often looks to what the public sector is doing as far as employment.
Megan speaking. Thank you, Trinity. Well, we've introduced our 7 election priorities. And as part of that, we've created a kit that can help you put some of these things front and centre as part of the election. And it's the PWDA's Federal Election Community Activation Kit. You can use this kit no matter who you are, and you can use it to advocate. This will be on our election hub, and there will be a link to the election hub that will be shared in the chat now-ish, I hope. But basically what we're asking you to do is think about taking the pledge to commit for the rights of people with disability, convince others to vote to disability needs, engage with your candidates, with your local candidates, spread the word, use the social media spaces and things we've offered, demand election accessibility. If we can't vote, we can't have our voices met, and join us at PWDA. There will be another link to the membership in the chat now. So we want to encourage you to download and engage and share back as much as possible. We're going to take a short 5-minute break. And during that time, when we return, our PWDA Director Steph Travers will facilitate a Q&A and discussion about the issues that matter most to you, and Senator Jordan Steele John will be joining us afterwards. See you shortly.
Anastasia speaking. Welcome back, everyone, to today's event. We will now hand over to PWDA Board Director, Steph Travers.
Hi, Stephanie speaking. Welcome back, everyone. For those who may be just joining, I am Steph Travers, Board Director, Board Secretary, and co-convener of the People with Disability Australia Membership Engagement Board Advisory Group. For those of you that cannot see me, I am a 35-year-old female with dark hair in a ponytail. I wear glasses, I have dark eyes, and I am wearing a maroon shirt with a collar. I am coming to you from the Darkinjung country on the Sydney Central Coast. I pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us here today. We've just heard about people with disabilities, 7 key priorities for the federal election, and how you can take action using our community activation kit. This next section is all about you, your questions, reflections, and your ideas for what we make our priorities our reality. You can raise your virtual hand if you'd like to ask a question verbally, use the Q&A box to submit a written question anonymously or publicly, or post a question or comment in the chat box. I'll be doing my best to get through as many as we can in the next 15 minutes, so please keep your questions short and focused. If we can't get to your question today, we'll take it on notice and follow up after the event. I want to reassure everyone that has submitted questions for Senator Rishworth in the previous session that those will be presented to the Minister and the answers published, and any questions for Senator John will be collated if we run out of time. We understand you have a great many questions. If you have any questions that have a personal focus, we will make sure you get direct access to the right people offline from this forum. Please feel free to contact us on pwd@pwd.org.au or 1-800-422-015 for these personal things. Our comms team is posting these details in the chat. So I'd like to open the floor, and I'll start with some of the most popular responses and questions that we've had to our comms team today. And my question is actually to all of you. There've been a lot of questions coming in about the NDIS. And if we could put 3 things to our candidates on changes to the NDIS, what should they be?
Thanks, Steph. I'm just having a look to see if anyone has raised their hand to speak to that question.
This as a whole person with a disability. They got to take us as a whole person without even those with a neurological birth defect. We can't just take one piece of an impairment or a disorder to make them happy. They got to see us as a whole person with the disability of what affects us everyday life. And they're not doing that. And they haven't done that since the start of the NDIS.
Exactly, and that's why co-design is so important, because we need these assessments to be holistic and take all of our impairments and our disabilities into account, especially if we have complex needs. Andy Shim, do you have a question? Oh, do you have an answer?
The question was what the 3 things we should be prioritizing regarding NDIS were. Is that correct? That's the question.
If you could put 3 things to candidates on the changes to the NDIS, what would they be?
Okay, yeah. The first one I would say is, and I'm trying not to get too policy wonky about this, is that there was a joint committee into the culture and capability of the NDIS, or the culture and capability review. In its interim report was a recommendation that all NDI staffers, especially those in persons facing roles, undergo trauma-informed disability cultural competency training. So that's the first thing I would state, is that really ensure that recommendation to ensure that NDIS staff receive training on how to engage people with disability in a trauma-informed way is implemented. Because I think in the shuffle of consultation fatigue and the rigmarole of consultations, perhaps the culture and capability review was lost a bit in the shuffle. The second and third ones, less than 30 seconds, as people have already said it, view as whole of body, whole of person, rather than as siloed impairments. And thirdly and finally is to perhaps avoid double jeopardy or re-litigation if possible. There are a number of stories of people who are having to go to the ART multiple times or the AAT multiple times. I think they have to seriously reconsider why some people are more likely than others to go to the ART, and to therefore look again at how to ensure the NDIA can be model litigants, and how that they can bring back, for example, the independent expert reviews and other, I think, mechanisms like early resolution processes, so that people aren't re-traumatizing themselves by going to the ART unnecessarily. So yeah, summary of 3 things are trauma-informed training from the culture and capability review, whole of body perspectives, and number 3 is trying to improve planning and review processes so that people aren't having to go to the ART.
Thanks, Andy. You're very well informed, and I love your phrasing on it, that you called it double jeopardy. That's great. We'll take note of those as well. Rowena.
Hi, I am an NDIS participant myself, and I think it's very dangerous to just pick 3 things. I think that we've done an enormous amount of work in the Disability Royal Commission and the review and co-design work that disabled people and disabled providers have bared their souls over the problems with the NDIS and the solutions that we know are needed. So I would ask the candidates to commit to implementing all recommendations of the Disability Royal Commission and all changes that are being recommended by disabled people using the NDIS. And I do want to say that I have been deeply betrayed by Labor's actions in going through the cuts to the NDIS, ignoring the co-design and the enormous effort and actual trauma that disabled participants have gone through to share their stories, and also in their actions in their media strategy, which have demonized disabled people and undermined everyday people's trust and value of the NDIS and support for disabled people. This level of ableism that we're seeing in the community is directly a result of this constant media strategy to support the Labor's NDIS bill cuts. So I want to know specifically, how will Labor rectify the extreme harm done by them to the disabled community in Australia over the last 2 years? Thank you.
That was very well articulated, and I think that's why we need a minister, and that's why we're asking for a minister, and we hope our community can drive that forward in whoever forms government in the next federal election, because the Royal Commission and NDIS review recommendations were very important, and our community is very scared. Craig.
Yeah, hi, it's Steph, and hi everyone. Well done on a great forum and opportunity to connect. My 3 things would be community and state level advisory bodies for the NDIS. Like initially we were promised that people with disabilities would have some level to sort of influence and connect with the agency at a local level and provide feedback on what was going wrong. But that seems to have devolved into them just having a board and this independent advisory council, which is like a really remote and distant from ordinary experiences on the ground. They've also sort of decided, I think, somehow that Australia isn't a federation anymore for the purposes of the NDIS. So they've kind of got, they've got like a New South Wales, Southern and ACT manager that is really remote and unconnected to local people on the ground. We really need, particularly given the foundational supports that have been constructed at a state level, there needs to be a state advisory body for the NDIS. Don't remove supports and assess people off the scheme until foundational supports are built and properly funded, would be my second one. Thirdly would be reform local area coordination at the same time as they build a new information and referral stream in tier 1 of the foundational supports. Local area coordination, the quality of it is really mixed. And if it goes wrong, the participant experience really sours. And like the quality of them, basic administrative errors, people being given plans with the wrong names on them or the wrong dates, and so they're held up or they wind up in AOT. The whole thing needs reform and probably needs to be retendered. So 3 things, but 3 big things.
Thank you, Craig. And I think it's also very important that we want a nationally consistent foundational supports, which is what we're arguing for as well. So it's not state by state. And
wanting to acknowledge the time. So we're just hitting 2:20 p.m. and we do have the Senator present with us now. So what we would like to do is to pose a second question to our members that they can answer while we move into the next session and segment, which will also involve an open Q&A.
Yeah, so the second question is, what is the most important thing candidates commit to regarding the Disability Royal Commission? And I know they should do all of it, but we just want to hear the priorities from each of you about what should be prioritized from that Royal Commission. So Shirley, would you like to say something?
Mute. I really wanted to talk about the NDIS, but my one thing for the Royal Commission is all of it, and respond. They still haven't responded to the Royal Commission, so let's see their response to it. And can I quickly do something on NDIA? I think it's pretty important. I want to see the candidates that are going to repeal some of the terrible clauses that were put in. We heard about the whole person and how important that is to us. Now, Rishworth couldn't say whole person often enough on a previous video she did. The so-called assessment that is not going to be valid. They will assess the whole person. They will not fund the whole person. And that's important to look at Section 32L. They are only funding those impairments that meet the access criteria. They won't interweave that with the whole person. That's probably one. And the lists are causing so much harm, especially for people who are already living in poverty. They cannot buy the simplest things to help them. Probably that's all. What was the other one? There was one more, never mind. I'll let Jordan, Jordan will do better.
That's all right. Thank you, Shirley. And it is very hard to live right now, especially on the pension. So I can appreciate that as well. If anyone has any answers for your priorities for the Royal Commission, please let us know them. Thank you for your reflections today, everyone. I'll now hand over to Megan Spindler-Smith for our next segment, which is Senator Jordan Steele-John.
Megan speaking. Thank you so much, Steph. And thank you everyone for your questions. We do acknowledge that we didn't get to everyone, but it is my absolute pleasure to welcome Senator Jordan Steele-John. Senator Jordan Steele-John is a Green senator from Western Australia and a proud disabled person. Senator Steele-John holds the portfolios of health, disability rights and services, foreign affairs, peace and nuclear disarmament for the Australian Greens. So only a couple of things. And he will now share the Australians Greens commitments to people with disability and how the Greens will act on the issues and policies that matter most to our community. Welcome, Senator Steele-John.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be with you all today. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to have a chat. I've recently disclosed publicly that I, as well as having cerebral palsy, am an ADHDer, which makes sense as to why I often find it hard to speak in time, or to time rather. But I'm going to do as good a job as I can hitting that 5-minute mark, so we have lots of time for questions. I first want to acknowledge that I'm talking to you from First Nations and unceded land. And as a Greens MP, I want to share with you some of the key commitments we've made in the election. I also want to begin by acknowledging and thanking explicitly PWDA for your incredible work in the fight and campaign together against Labour's NDIS bill. The bravery, the courage and clarity shown by the organisation, particularly by its board and president, former President Marika Jonkers, was transformative in that campaign and set, I think, the gold standard for bravery and clarity in the face of government pressure to kind of get on board with a terrible legislative agenda. And I hope to continue to have the opportunity to work with the organisation over the next years, hopefully, to continue to build the power of the vital presence that is this organisation, its deep connection to grassroots disability community, and willingness to take on any party, regardless of their stripes, in the name of disability rights and justice. Having said that, here's the commitments that we are making as a party to the community. Firstly, to restore the $80 billion worth of cuts that are forecast and are now in the process of being implemented to our NDIS as a direct result of Labour's NDIS bill. So that will hopefully see a large re-injection of funding and direct supports to participants. We also acknowledge that there has unfortunately already been tens of thousands of people kicked off the scheme because of the legislation, using the powers of the legislation, I should say, particularly those with psychosocial disabilities. And so we want to make direct financial payments to those participants and their families of over $2,500 twice a year to try to provide some emergency material relief, because we know that being disabled is expensive, and having your funding cut doesn't mean the things that you need stop being required. They just mean you have to try to find them or pay for them yourself in a cost of living crisis. We also want to provide additional resources to the Quality and Safeguards Commission, even though I'm well aware, problematic organisation, problematic structure, probably need to change that up so that it, works. But, just so that we are clear, there does need to be more resourcing for a quality and safeguarding function, even though I acknowledge that that function probably needs to be, at this point, radically rebuilt. Beyond the NDIS, because I think it's important to acknowledge that there are 5.5 million of us in Australia now. We are the third largest minority in our community, third only behind men, bless them. And we need to look and ensure that government is providing services for us, policies for us beyond the NDIS. And so, first of all, foundational supports. There is no clear definition of what they are by the federal government or among the states or territories, but whatever they are, they must be nationally consistent. They must ensure transferability for participants. There must be consistency around safeguarding in those delivery of those supports, and they must be delivered in place, tested and validated before we are launched off our supports and into foundational support land. Now, we know that's not happening, but that's what the Greens will be pushing for. We'll also be pushing for the full implementation of a 20% quota for the Australian Public Service in relation to the employment of disabled people, a national inclusive education strategy that is co-created by disabled people, parents, families, advocates, experts, and unions to get us to a clear and time-bound moment. We've said it at 2030, might take a bit longer, but I think we should be ambitious in this space to have a fully inclusive education system where all disabled people, all disabled students are educated alongside their non-disabled peers. We also are committed to the elimination of discrimination in the workplace based on disability, and want to see the transition away from differential wages and Australian disability enterprises to a space where, call me a radical, but there isn't an asterisk on the Australian employment law pantheon that says you get paid for your time except if you're a disabled person. So we want to see the elimination of that discrimination and the public funding of ADAs as part of a transition towards fully inclusive work. In the health system, we're committed to over $122 million to the support of the primary health networks for the purposes of delivering inclusive care for those with intellectual disabilities and the training of officials within the health system to appropriately provide that care. And we've also committed to a number of policies around the elimination of forced sterilisation of disabled people, the return of sex work as something that is able to be funded under the NDIS, and of course the repeal of the worst parts of the NDIS legislation that were forced through the Parliament. Now there's a bunch of other issues, but I'm coming close on time, so I'll end with this. We as a community are incredibly powerful. There are, as I said, 5.5 million of us, and we vote. And on the 3rd of May, we have the opportunity to go into the ballot box and encourage our families to go into the ballot box and vote for parties that have committed and have a track record of delivering for our community and building power with our community. And hopefully to deliver a parliament with Greens and with independents that will work together to deliver the disability justice reforms actually needed by our community. I know there's a lot of concern about Peter Dutton and what he might do, but if we want change, we have to vote for it. And that's why I'm very, very proud to be put myself forward as a Greens MP for re-election and to be encouraging you all to vote Green on the 3rd of May. So I'll finish there.
Thank you, Senator Jordan Steele-John, and thank you for sharing this really important set of discussions with our community. But mostly, we're really thankful that you're going to answer some questions from the audience. But a quick reminder to everyone, if they are of a personal or individual nature, we can make sure that you can access the right person outside of this forum. So Andy Shim, I know you are the first person with a question, and then we will move on to those with their hands up.
Hi, Senator. I think we spoke maybe 8 days ago.
Hi,
I'm doing well. In the interest of time, I'll keep this a really short question. So how do we improve the intersectionality of disability representation, especially within the APS, in line with DRC recommendation 5.6?
Thank you so much. Question. I think there's two things we need to do there, Andy. Firstly, we have to make sure that we actually implement that 20% target for the public sector, because at the moment the levels are woefully low and often going backwards, particularly at the departmental level. And at the same time, we have to ensure that culturally within the APS, there is an understanding of the complexity and diversity of disability and the intersectionality of the disabled experience. And what I mean by that is it ain't good enough just to have the one guy in the wheelchair called Greg. And I say that as you know, I am the guy in the wheelchair called Greg. Like, you know, we really need to make sure that there is the cultural competency and the accountability within these departments to make sure that they are in fact going beyond oh, isn't it great we now give out sunflower lanyards, like actually, you know, like actually building an inclusive departmental culture, one that understands intersectionality and one that is proactive in identifying and removing the barriers to employment within the services. So that looks like, again, I know I draw a lot of things back to it, but a Department of Disability, Department of Disability Strategy within the PMO, and a strengthened DDA are all critical tools in delivering those outcomes, because you know, both of those mechanisms, all three of those mechanisms, can be used to confront ableist culture when and where it exists, because it absolutely does.
Thank you. So Sarah, you're up next. You've got your hand up. Love to share the mic with you. Sarah, yep, great. What's your question for Senator Steele-John?
Hi there, Senator.
Please call me Jordan. It's absolutely fine to call me Jordan.
Awesome, thank you, because it's a lot easier to say.
It is, it is. Yeah, really appreciate you being here today. Just a couple of I guess more points around resisting the attack on the NDIS. In terms of and we all know what's happening, don't we? We all know what's happening. And I feel like we need to be more blunt in our resistance around that. And for me, I think that probably centers around not accepting the framing set up by Labor on a couple of key issues. So Shorten went out and had his kind of media blitz, deliberately attacking people with a psychosocial ability, the most vulnerable people in our community, all with the aim, really, to kind of manufacture consent around foundational supports. And so I got to say, I was dismayed widely in the community that we conceded to that, because it was sending the message that somehow some disabilities were less deserving than others. And it's opened a really horrible gateway, which frankly affects everybody and is affecting everybody. You know, it's okay to create a class system in the NDIS. You know, segregating some people, also opening the door to cutting others. So that's one thing. The other frame I think we should reject it. Like, I'm pretty, just quickly on foundational still, I'm pretty sure that would mean pretty blatant discrimination in a court as well, singling out a person. You know, going after the most vulnerable people and turfing them out, you know, as less deserving. Anyway, so the next framing is that somehow that the NDIS is only acceptable if there is an economic outcome. And that's obviously around two things, around funding, but also secondly, that somehow people should only be on the NDIS if they're working. And
I agree.
that is unacceptable. It's unacceptable, and it is so ableist, you know. It's also incredibly dangerous given what we've seen in the job seeker community, given how the abuse that's gone on with those employment providers. We should be drawing a firm line between the NDIS and any kind of employment service, because the function of the NDIS fundamentally was for supports.
Sarah?
I'm sorry I've gone on for a bit, but I think these are two really important things. And finally,
Sarah,
there has been virtually no accountability around the abuses perpetrated by Labor in this term, you know,
Sarah,
in the media.
Sorry to interrupt you. We've only got a short time, and I really would love to give Jordan an opportunity to respond.
Yes,
and we've
sorry.
got some other
I'm
great
sorry.
questions
Yes.
coming, so I just don't want to miss out on those. So if you could, if you're okay with that, I'm going to
I've
give Jordan an
got
opportunity.
quick fire responses to some very, very good questions, Sarah. Okay, so number one, you talk about accountability. I absolutely agree. Let's be really clear. The Labour Party at the last election ran on a platform of protecting, saving, supporting our NDIS. We're very happy to pose with the pictures. We're happy to pose with the campaign assets. They then turned around in government and pursued a legislative agenda that resulted in the passage of a piece of legislation that was worse than the Liberals had proposed. Worse than anything Stuart Roberts dreamed in his worst nightmare. And we know that. And you don't have to rely on me as a politician saying that. The journalists, Rick Morton and others, have proven conclusively that they picked the legislation up, copy-pasted, and when actually we can make some of these pieces worse, and that's what they did. And they did that with the help of the Liberals eventually, but not until they had to fight their way through months and months of our community calling them out. And we did demonstrate incredible power and collective curiosity and force. And we turned for Labor what they kind of thought of as a victory lap into one of their most painful moments of their government. And it forced Bill Shorten to do something that no politician in Australian history has done. Do a press conference with Pauline Hanson and shake her hand. And he was forced to do that because there was no other way to get the Liberals on board at that point. Now, you talk about the community's response. The disability community, I think, was very clear from the beginning. Opposition to this bill, frustration with the NDIS review process, the failure of the government response. The government was also really clear that they had no interest in a genuine collaborative policy debate. They spent millions of dollars on comms people and the most ableist, distortionary, discriminatory narratives that framed us as thieves, as criminals, as people that were rorting the system based on lies. And I want to be really clear about this. Labor put in press releases during that debate statements about participants having spent on X, Y, Z. And eventually they coughed to the fact that it was one case they'd been able to find, and they were framing it as multiple people doing these kind of things. Disgusting. One of the worst ableist campaigns I've ever seen. They did it because they did polling that told them that Australians actually didn't support these reforms, and so they needed to frame us as being evil. And also, what would the Liberals do? They'd do worse. Well, Labor was passing the Liberals' bill, so there was no worse in that situation. We're now faced with an opportunity to give them some electoral consequence on election day, and I hope that happens. And at least with the Greens, I can tell you, if you vote one Greens, we are not preferencing Peter Dutton, and we will not support a Dutton government. Has that undermined our negotiating position with the ALP? Yep, absolutely. But we will not give people any question in their mind as to whether you can vote Greens and you will not get Dutton. So it's purely, do you support what happened with the bill? Or do you want to send them a message that it was shite? The thing that I will say, because there are 97 people on here, all passionately part of this organisation, if you believe that your organisation and other organisations should in the future speak out harder, faster than happened at that point, tell them that. Because you're the members that drive the board, that inform the staff, that make the statements. There were times when I felt very frustrated by conversations about, but we won't be in the tent anymore and we need to consult on the legislation, because the government had no interest in consultation. They'd already made up their mind. This kind of governmental kind of co-design that we'd all been hoping for, the government has no interest in co-design. They just passed a bill that means they don't have to bother with it. They don't care anymore about what we have to say. So we need to think about what it looks like to become extra parliamentary, to take our advocacy work to the community, our direct support to the community, to engage in mutual aid, because this is serious. The stuff that we've seen happen so far is just the beginning, I fear. And we are going to need to put our arms directly around each other, or metaphorically so, if that's not your vibe. It doesn't meet your access needs, to be able to support each other through this process.
Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, Sarah. We have time for just one more question, one quick question. So I'm going to throw to Henry Kay, because you've had your hand up for a while. What's your question for Jordan?
I can also probably extend for another 5 minutes to enable an additional question, because I know that one went long.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Jordan.
Henrik, your audio is not on.
Yeah.
We can hear you now. Thank you.
I'd like to say that we should be getting more jobs for people with disabilities. Also, attendance voting should be outlawed in Australia, as it is in violation of Section 23 of the Disability Discrimination Act. I lobbied for it in Victoria and got that done. Also, we need to have more help as regards tourism facilities for people with disabilities as well. And I think another thing we should do is try and get the public transport more accessible. I know in Melbourne they ordered trains, extraplus trains, which are lowered to the platform and are good for people with disabilities. But also in Boondah and Queensland, they adjusted the station platform to make it in line with people disabled trains and get more of that work done.
Yep. Look, I'll just tackle one of those in the case of time, Henry, on public transport. Couldn't agree with you more. We're pledging a significant investment towards new public transport. Part of why we're doing that is because so much of the existing system needs to be upgraded. And let's be really clear, when we don't do that, that is a form of social segregation. If you cannot get out into your community, you cannot be part of the community. And that's not acceptable. So we've made, I think it's, I can get back to you if people really want to know the transport figure. But one of the things that is driving that is, I don't want to go to any more train stations that you get off the platform and then you look at the ramp and it's like, wow, I didn't realize I entered an Olympic event. Like that's not a thing that we should have to do.
Megan speaking, absolutely agree. And our last question for today is, and I'm sorry there's not a name, but 492191, your hand is up. Hi.
My name's
Terry. I know 49291. No.
Hi, Jordan.
Hello.
Jordan, my question is, there's been a lot of talk on NDIS today, which is really important, but I'm one of the ones that is not included in the NDIS, though I have been assessed at like 86% on the Auswestry Index, so I'm severely crippled and severely disabled. There's no voice for people like me. We don't get any government assistance at all. And it's like our lives don't matter. My area question really, or for consideration, is that I arrived in Australia 14 years ago, happy and healthy, and I was an athlete, so very physically fit. A federal government provider is responsible for my injuries. They've been a provider for the last two elections. There's no consequences to them. I would like to know why I, have to go without help getting dressed. I can go living in the same clothes for 14 days plus no showering for 15 days. I'd like to know why my life has little value compared to, others. As I said, I didn't come into this country with a disability. I was able-bodied. I would just like to know, what your party plans to do. I know it's online, looking to appoint a disability minister, which is great, but how will I benefit potentially from a change in leadership?
Well, good, excellent question. And I think the first thing I would say is under the Greens, you'd be on the NDIS. Like if those are your supports, you should be on the NDIS. And it's absolutely disgraceful that you haven't been allowed access to the scheme. So first of all, we get you on the NDIS. Second of all, if you needed the disability support pension or were yourself also a carer for a disabled person, qualified for the carer payment, those would go up. Third, I'm hearing a lot of medical issues and the cost of healthcare and medicines are extravagant at the moment. So we want to make it free to see the GP again. Bring dental care into Medicare, so any dental or oral health issues that you've got would be completely covered under Medicare. And if you are a concession card holder, which you really should be, the out-of-pocket, no, I imagine not. Well, that would be another thing we would fix. So until you were a concession card holder, we would take the co-payment for a PBS medication from $31.60 as it is now to $7.70. So you would go to the concessional rate. Once you get a concession card, as you should do by the sound of it, you then go to zero copayment. So your medication will be free. If you're on just 2 PBS medications, that means in a year, just on that alone, you save $574. Like this is the material cost of living relief that our community needs. We disabled people are people. NDIS is important, explicit disability policy is important, and every other part of policy is relevant. Health is relevant, housing is relevant, groceries are relevant because we eat food. So all of the other policy spaces the Greens are moving in, housing, healthcare, grocery, particularly, I see as being heavily relevant to our community.
Thank you, Jordan. And Sarah, was it for your question? Thank you. No, sorry, what was your name again?
Terry.
Carrie, thank you. Jordan, thank you for your time particularly.
Can I see my last one too?
No, I'm very sorry, we're out of time and our captioners need to go, so it's important for our event that it remains accessible for everyone. I'm sorry, Tanya. Thank you, Jordan, for your time, and willingness to engage directly with our community as well is really valuable. And thank you everybody else for joining us today for this important conversation. As we head towards the federal election, we cannot and will not allow our rights to be overlooked. We are a powerful voting bloc. We are ready to hold decision makers to account, not just during the election, but every day after it. Today, together, we can make 2025 the year that disability rights became a political priority. So I invite you to use our federal election community activation kit. It's there to help you take the pledge to vote for disability rights, speak to candidates, mobilize your own networks, and fight for policies that prioritize our full inclusion and justice. Jordan mentioned mutual aid. Please look after each other. We're fractured and we need to find a way to come together. Thank you, everybody. That concludes today's event. Be safe.
Thank you very much. Go well, everyone.